Uh-huh. So I'm going to start with you, Momtaza. Your Instagram handle, I know, right, is Roughneck Refugee for all those who want to follow her, which is, for me, not only nice on the tongue, but it also has an element of kind of like a duality of a hardness and a softness to it that I kind of enjoy. Was that what you were going for? And also, can you talk a little bit about, there's somewhere where you're quoted as saying, Somalia is a nation of poets, which is an interesting, yeah, you were, which is an interesting thing because you're a young poet laureate and so was Warsan Shire. Do you think that's like a heritage, genetic, in the soil, something like that? Okay. Sorry, it was a lot to start with.
So starting with the heavy hitters. God, I never thought I'd have to explain an Instagram handle. My God. Who thinks of these things? I think its origins are basically in. I'm like a big fan of like 90s hip hop. I'm like those annoying people that love the golden age.
Millennials.
Exactly. Yeah. Please don't remind me. And there's like MC Light has a song called Roughneck.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of like MC Light and a lot of these like women rappers from the 90s. But it was just like really funny, and I just thought, oh well, you know, it's kind of captures like the sort of humor and tragedy that I always try to interplay with in my work, but also in my life. Like that's just my personality. Mm-hmm. I have a like very, very black sense of humor. Very dark. So I think maybe it just sort of reflects that. But in terms of what you said about Somalia being a nation of poets and that refrain that you hear all the time, I think I'm, you know, obviously because I'm writing in the English language, I'm a little bit disconnected from the imagery and the symbolism of Somali poetry that is like very much about, I mean classical forms of Somali poetry that are about the land and the people and the texture of life in the streets that, you know, would be lost on me because that's not my life growing up. But in terms of the place of poetry in society, that is something that I've definitely taken on board. So the role of the poet as a witness, the role of the poet as a bridge between generations, between people, between communities. And that's something that's very embedded in Somali culture and daily life because poetry is a very democratized form. And this is something that you see in other African cultures. It's a form that people turn to, and they don't necessarily have to have this ivory academic training to claim their role as a poet. It's very connected to the sort of like the people. It's very, 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 it's a two-way street kind of thing. And Warsan is a good friend. She's amazing. And I think I'm definitely part of this like lineage that is now emerging and flourishing of Somali writers and Somali poets specifically writing in the English language and trying to find a place within it. Yeah.
It's interesting that you also mentioned the disconnect because even though there is a disconnect and you don't necessarily engage with the classical Somali poetry, no one is really writing the classic versions of where we come from, right? Is that why you keep saying that you're writing in English while Somali?
I think it's because, you know, there are various colonial languages at play in the imagination of, let's say, the Somali people, whether it's, you know, I mean, again, you have the fragmentation of our identity, you have the Somali territories, but you have people that speak French, you have people that speak Italian, especially in the past, you have people that speak various languages, even in this country, you have people that speak many of the Kiswahili as well as the other sort of indigenous languages over the years, and they may have picked them up as well. So you have... there's so many languages at play. So the English and French and Italian, that kind of colonial influence has always been ones in which Somali writers are perhaps not really able to express themselves creatively up until recently because they were languages of utility, they were languages of archival, they were languages of like documenting your kind of the legal frameworks and things like that. And obviously that was changed after independence, but really your audience is going to change depending on the language that you use. That's why I always bring that up. If I was writing in Somali, my audience would be many, many, many older men. That would be the audience because they would engage with it and they would be very judgy because, you know, there's really no space for you as a young woman to explore, I think, the taboo in the Somali language without facing resistance. particularly from older men, because they do believe that's their domain.
Of course, language, expression, openness, taboo topics, which they're allowed, but women are not necessarily allowed. Still on the topic of language, Willie, I wanted to ask you, you rap multilingually, and you've maintained rapping multilingually. Is there any specific reason for that choice?
Yes, one, I predominantly, I do my spoken word in Sheng and rap in Sheng for the streets. Yeah, I belong in the streets.
Really? Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
I belong in the streets. I have a line that says, Kama Jehovah Witness, we belong to the streets. Yes, and also in English. But I more or less achieve the same both in Sheng and in English, but predominantly I do my spoken word in Sheng.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of Sheng in itself, because there's, how do I say it? Like there's different versions of Sheng, right? Depending on what, you're a proud Nax vegan, there's a different version. There's a different version depending on if you're a millennial or you're a Gen Z. There's a different Sheng depending on the neighborhood. So is there like a, not that there's like a communal Sheng, but how do you make sure the message gets across? Is there an interpretation table next to the lyric? Like what are we?
Yeah, so you know, spoken word and poetry largely for performance is what you say, when and how you say it. But what you say is as important as how you say it. And what you say is not so much what you mean. The metaphors and the puns are in what you mean. So the Sheng has really morphed, like from 2002, 2003, 2005 Sheng to 2010, and now I cannot even get the Sheng of today. The Eastland Sheng is crazy.
Same.
But I use like, and Sheng came from Nakuru, by the way.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
What
Sheng
do you
is
mean?
from Nakuru.
What do you mean? Explain yourself before the good people.
So yes, I wanted to get to what I mean. So I use a Sheng whereby it's not so much on what I say, but what I mean, because language is for communication. So I use a Sheng that is not so deep into Nakulombo Tov and all of that, that the Sheng that they use nowadays, but I use a very basic Sheng in with poetry, because also we have metaphors that people have to deconstruct. So if I use very heavy language, then I wouldn't be communicating. So I use the very basic Sheng to communicate, and heavy on Swahili also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just go back to that part where you were saying Sheng came from Nakuru.
You want us to talk about this?
The people want to know.
Yeah, so Sheng is largely borrowed heavily from Kikuyu. And Nakuru is metropolitan, but we have so many, the natives in Nakuru are more Kikuyu. So it started like Kinde, Thao, those are words from Nakuru. So when people spoke Kikuyu so much, I can hear Kikuyu and I'm not Kikuyu. So, and now people mixed Kikuyu and Swahili and it became Sheng. So Sheng predominantly is from Nakuru, by the way.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea of origins. I had no idea of the documentation, which is an interesting project, but we'll get into that later. Michelle, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about actually what we were just talking about, past poetry and changing practices. So in terms of language in your poetry, which is so lyrical and so beautiful, do you ever look back on your past poetry and you're like, I can't believe that's the language I was using to describe this? Do you feel like sometimes you're a different person from who you used to be? And piggybacking on that, how difficult is it to get your books here? And can you speak on that experientially as a Kenyan poet?
Yeah, I definitely do feel very different, especially because I think for me, one of the main reasons I write poetry is, I think, to try and articulate something that perhaps might not have language at the moment, or it's something that is still in development before we can say, okay, this is how we can sculpt the feeling, the moment. And so sometimes going back to my previous writing, it can feel as though, it's kind of a nascent form of an idea that might have failed to take hold. And so, is it here or is it not? But on the other hand, I think it serves also as a kind of record of something. And, you know, everything changes, including, you know, what we try to grasp at when we're writing poetry, or anything, basically. So I feel like, yes, I do look back and identify certain difficulties or gaps or things that are still in question with my work. But what I do appreciate is that, you know, it's left a mark on, regarding something which I think many poets would say is also at the heart of their practice. Yeah, about publishing and books. It is a struggle, I think, and I mean, of late and even currently, there's been a lot of support from the African Poetry Book Fund, for example, which I think is where a lot of upcoming African poets kind of get their grounding to start off with. And I know that they've also supported some library projects as well. But when it comes to the question of actually, you know, publishing your work and having it go around the world, that's a completely different story. And I think for many other writers, whether they're poets or novelists, there's like two centers, right, where attention is focused on in the UK and the US. And I think that dramatically alters how we think about our careers, or even how we think about what can be made available to individuals who live on the continent. But, you know, I mean, we have in Nigeria, for example, Masobe, here we have Jahazi Press, and I think regardless of all the obstacles, like they're trying to do work, you yourself have also, you know, self-published, and I think a lot of other artists are thinking of different ways of making their work, or everybody's work, known and seen. And I think I really appreciate that. There are so many individuals, I think Alexis and Rosie of Magic Door have also been trying to do that. And I think it necessarily forces us to think of how else we can, you know, who are we writing for, and how can we get what we're writing for to them. So yeah, it's been an interesting time to think of how to reframe how we think about, you know, our careers, and also what publishing looks like, because it could be literally going to town and like just printing a set of 10 books and being like, okay, friends, everybody gets one. You have homework. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you feel. So yeah, I think there's a lot of progress, but it's also like really difficult trying to embed yourself in traditional publishing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I totally agree. Part of the reason I self-published was because it's so difficult to embed yourself in the traditional industry. It's interesting that you said kind of, or this is what I got, things that we're forced to do or driven in a certain direction because of the circumstances around us. Brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, Momtaza, about the poem that you wrote that's called "A Few Facts We Hesitantly Know to Be Somewhat True," which I really enjoyed. There's a line that you say in that poem, I'm looking down because I don't want to forget it. You say that art is something we do when the war ends. Did y'all get that? Okay. Art is something we do when the war ends. I wanted to ask if that's something that you still feel. Was it in reference to an outer war or an internal war? And I also wanted to reference something you said in that same conversation about, can I just read it out? My mother would point out that the people ululating and dancing on screen had once fled toward the Kenyan border, leaving behind their grandmother who had fallen into quicksand. She had begged them to go on without her. I was transfixed by the scene of her descendants' joy. In my youth, I couldn't understand how they could ever dance again, but you have to keep dancing. I know that now.
Thank you for putting that. That's from an interview that I did. It was that last part, just to clarify, it was referring to one time I was watching a VHS tape, because like there's in kind of like in sort of diasporic Somali culture, your wedding could end up being watched by some random person like a continent away, because they'll just get a copy of a VHS tape or something. So I remember growing up watching a lot of people's like weddings, and it was like this person's like your second cousins, third cousins, twice removed, you know, and I remember it was like this family that the wedding was happening in Toronto or something, and I was just watching it, and my mum was just like, watching it with me, and she was like, oh, it's so nice, da, da, da. And then she was like, oh, it's a shame what happened to their grandma. And I was like, what happened to their grandma? And then she just said, well, during the war, like they had to flee and they were running towards the Kenyan border, and then because Somalia has like very sort of there's all sorts of like topographies that you have to kind of go through. You're in like a forest, and then you're going through all sorts of landscapes basically. And then she basically quite literally was trapped in quicksand, and they had to leave her behind. So I just was shell shocked when my mom told me, but it's that kind of just came from the way that these stories are sort of just dropped into your lap in the middle of everyday life, and they disrupt even these moments of like quiet joy, but they look so happy on the screen, and I just couldn't understand. I mean, I was very young when this happened, so I really was like, I would never get over that, and I just would spend the rest of my life in like perpetual mourning. But my mom was like, people aren't like that, and they're resilient, and they have to keep dancing, and they have to keep keeping on, But with regards to, I think that particular poem that you drew from, it's the reason the title is kind of a bit tongue in cheek is because I was just trying to like problematize the idea of like, what's a fact, what's a characteristic, what's a trait that I believe, defines. I mean, I was also speaking to like Horners as well, people from the Horn of Africa, and I was like, they don't call us Horners for nothing, like, quite stubborn or quite hard-headed. But it was trying to kind of play around with these sort of national mythologies, which I only half-heartedly believe in, to be quite honest with you. I think it's a load of old shit most of the time, but sometimes there's some truth to it. So it's, again, that tension. But I think when I said, when I was writing, art is something we do when the war ends, it's this external voice that is in conversation with my own internal contradictions. I don't believe that's necessarily true, but I think a lot of us do relate to this notion that, art is considered a luxury in society by a lot of people, an act of sort of like self-indulgence in a way. And that can actually have like structural consequences in terms of like funding and governments and like what they actually believe is worth funding and worth supporting and nourishing. But at the same time, I feel, that comes from sometimes a sense of self-preservation on behalf of the people who say that, because they know that it can unlock certain truths, and art can open up certain conversations, and some of the truths that emerge may be painful truths. So I think there is this way in which it's both minimized, its effects and its power is minimized, but I think even the people that do the minimizing know that it's a threat, hence the minimization. Yeah. So.
I think that's the only reason they do it, actually. I think the diminishing is because of that. Which brings me to my next question for Willie. In terms of poetry, a lot of people say, poetry could not remove a president. But a lot of the work you do, not even just because of the spoken word, but how you started was also doing a lot of civic education in buses and stuff. There must be some guiding ethos behind this. There's a reason that you believe in what you do and why you do it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Wow, I say I am a realist. So all I do is express myself, then people call that poetry. And I started poetry in 2014. But in 2017, 21st January, that's my mom's birthday, I was almost shot for mistaken identity in Nakuru, because I have dreadlocks, and baby locks is the ugliest face of dreadlocks, and I was stereotyped. They thought I belonged to a gang, dubbed I had sweatpants, Crocs, sweatshirt, and I was going into town. So they looked at me and they thought I looked like someone they were looking for. So there was one notably drunk policeman and another one in uniform, and I was almost shot. And they say when a gun is put on your head, at that moment your whole life flashes in front of your eyes. And if they don't kill you, then you live as one who has nothing to lose. So from that moment on, I started writing pieces on enforced disappearance and defending human rights. So the first piece I ever wrote from that time was Dear Mr. President, and then the story goes and on when King Kaka released Wajinga Ninyi, we did another version with him. And from that point, my beat has been on social justice and defending human rights. And I really resonate with the art and the art of war, because also Tony Ked Bambara said, the work of an artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Because also with poetry, we make the war very fun. We make people indulge into the war. It's the art of war. And we have protest songs, protest poetry. And as we also speak truth to power, they say, you be funny or they will kill you. So you make them laugh about themselves. So I employ so much metaphors and so much pun, but I talk about very serious issues also, so that I can get the young people to indulge into the art. And that was very amazing also during the protest, June protest, because we made a couple of songs, and one of them was I Am Offended Too. And people used the music to jam in the streets while vlogging and TikToking, and people were at home and they were like, everybody's live. So they were going, and pretty much some people did not know what was going on about the bill and everything, but it was fun to be there. And that is the power of art. And they say art is power, soft power. And when you have power, people presume that you wield more than you do, and you have to act in ways that will maintain that power. And one of those ways is consistency and empathy. So art is very, very, very powerful. Yeah.
I love that. Oh, yes, you can clap if you want. Sorry. Michelle, the thing that I really wanted to explore with you along this particular theme was how you explore so many different versions of form in your books. So your latest collection, which is divided into 3 parts, right? And there's a little line in one of those parts that I feel like sums up everything that we've been experiencing as a country, as a nation. I mean, the world is on fire, right? And I'm just going to read it out. It says, and it's a very short in between everything. You say, the new year, you understand, should have been more than this. Can you just tell me what you were thinking about when you were writing that?
Yeah, okay, this is working great. Yeah, thanks for that. That collection, I had started in earnest thinking about it last year when we had the first Gen Z revolution. And what was at the heart of it were 3 things, you know. Firstly, I was trying to reconcile certain ideas that I'd been experimenting with across both poetry and science, but also the idea of rhythm that ties all of that together, and how that could also be seen in city life, especially the city of Nairobi. And I couldn't do all that without, you know, thinking about the protests. And that one specific line, I think, refers to a lot of difficulties and disappointments that I feel have been almost daily for a lot of people. You know, there are certain expectations that I think go without saying of what we as a city, as a people, require and demand and actually, you know, should get from our governments, from those who are supposed to take care of us. And I think that line specifically alludes to that, but also, broadly speaking, the state of the world as it is. There's kind of, and also, you know, New Year's for me has always been, I wake up on the 1st of January with a feeling of freshness in the air, freshness around me. There's just something very refreshing about it. But I think, you know, even before this whole wave took off in 2024, it just felt like, what are we doing? And so that is, I guess, one of the things at the center of that. And the book is also, well, the publication, it's not book length. The title is Collective Responsibility, Experiments in Pattern Making, which goes back to the idea of doing things together in community. I think that's one of the things I've been also trying to explore with my work as a writer, because I feel like you can be very removed in your little corners, you know, going inside your head. But I was asking myself what it would look like to give back to everyone all the things that I get that goes into my writing, because it's for everyone, it belongs to everyone. And so I mean, now just going back to that line, you know, the new year should have been more than this. I feel like it's also like a call to keep on remembering, you know, that we deserve so much more than we're getting, so much more in our interpersonal relationships, in our relationships with our governments, in our relationships with our countries, with our people, with nature. You know, I feel like there's always that tension and disappointment. So I think, yeah, that's where
Absolutely. There was something that I kind of want all of you to answer in terms of poetry kind of being viewed as what you said, like a luxury. Do you ever feel guilty for producing art or something beautiful? Like, does it ever feel like people make you feel like what you're doing is petty when there's revolutions going on, when there's bombings going on, when there's shootings going on? And how do you counter that, and what gives you hope? Maybe Michelle, you can start and we can...
Yeah, sure. Definitely. But I think the more I think about it, and even attending a session today with Rinaldo Walcott was very, I think, a reminder that this is what we do is very much in line with what we're trying to work and come up against. It's so important to, again, articulate those messy in-betweens, because that's, I guess, the fertile ground for which ideas arise from. And I think we might view the work that we do as a frivolity, you know, even as Momtaza said, many people view it like that, but reframing that thought into this is actually part and parcel of what it is we're trying to do, because, you know, I read a poem and suddenly I have energy to like go through the day just because of the message that it holds, or how it reframes something in my thinking, or what it forces me to see, what it forces me to confront. So in that sense, there's a lot of like energy in the work that I think, I guess, has also been taken away from people. For many Kenyans, you know, you did art until, for some of us, we were 9 years old, and then it was taken away from the syllabus. You know, you encounter poetry again for like 2 classes in your high school
and you hate it.
Education. Yeah, and you're like, what's all this? I don't get it. It's unimportant. It's frivolous. But then I feel like that's, you know, deliberate on some level, because there's an understanding of the power that poetry has, and poetry not as in the written form as well, but the poetry of existence, of making things anew every time. I always love that connection. The root word of poetry is poesis, which means to make. And if we're not making things anew, then you're stuck in a crumbling and deficient kind of existence. So I try to think about poetry as, you know, we are germinating something new. We want to stay evergreen in our thoughts and our feelings. And for me, it's a very important vehicle, you know, not just on the page, but also in daily life.
Making something anew. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is powerful.
I know.
The poetry of that is where you clap. The poetry of existence. Yeah. So yes, I used to feel that way until I realized if I stop writing, then what happens to people who cannot hold a pen? So my idea and why I do poetry is to bridge the gap between what is real and what is possible, and to expand the stories of the stories of whose gets told, because we cannot do everything, and that's the difference between the master builder and the worker. Me and you, we are workers, not master builders. We are ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own. So poetry is very powerful. Yeah,
Poets.
yeah, yes. So because when you asked if we can use poetry to remove kasongo, yes, we can, because
Half term.
Ha-
Half term. Half term.
Sitam. Poetry poetry achieves the revolution of the mindset. And as Tupac said, the idea is not to change the world, but to spark the mind that will change the world, because true leadership is in delegation. So all I have to do is poetry, and then I will spark the mind that will change the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Tupac.
thank you for that.
Tupac.
Yeah, I love the
You were
throwback.
quoting
Yeah, I love it.
Millennial.
Yeah. I think that really resonates with me, the idea of the poet as a spark, as a match, you know, that lights the next match and so on and so forth. I think for me, artists do this really important work of demystification. At least that's what they should do. They clarify the situation for people in a way that speaks to them on a different register than if you are reading journalism, than if you are engaging with like a political analysis. They can create work that is visceral, but at the same time help you understand what's in front of you. That's if they're doing their job. If they're not doing their job, they're propagandists. They create more confusion. They essentially mystify the situation. And they just act as baubles or symbols that are just very useless. And I think unfortunately, I mean, I'm speaking to the Black diasporic tradition here, so a lot of the UK, US, they're catching strays here. But some of the biggest artists are, you know, politically feeble-minded, to say the least. And we see their reactions now, and the work they create is not fit for the moment we're in now. It does not speak to the reality of Africans. It does not speak to the reality of African-descended people. It does not reflect to the reality of what's going on in Palestine. It doesn't mean that you have to be, you know, stand on a soapbox and essentially preach. And I really do believe that as an artist, you should preserve that element of individuality that we all have. You know, you can. It's okay to create work for yourself too. It's okay to create work that, as the title of this session states, you know, is a balm for you. But if you are going to seek to represent audiences, if you are in any shape or form demanding that, you know, people buy your shit, you know, that people listen to you, you have a responsibility. And I feel like when artists meet that responsibility, something magical happens, right? Whether we're listening to Miriam Makeba, whether we're listening to Nina Simone, all these legends and all these figures who, to great personal cost as well, they could find no other way but to combine their art with their political vision and their responsibility to their communities. That's where I think the magic lies. And when it comes to poetry, for me as well, I think there is something about poetry that speaks to both the individual and the collective. Because when you think about like poetry as one of the forms that is the easiest form of literature to write in a prison cell. In a prison cell. It's hard to write a novel with the tools at disposal in a prison cell. Okay. But you can write a few lines of a poem, right? And when we even think of the entire corpus or genre of prison literature, it speaks to how people turn to poetry even in the darkest, most isolated, loneliest moment in their personal lives. But even then, what are they speaking to? They're speaking to a wider kind of passion for justice, for a greater cause than themselves. So that always lies in poetry, you know, the tension between the collective and the individual. But yeah, I just feel like at their best, artists are the backup dancers of the revolution. And at their worst, they betray it.
I had so many more questions, but I'm trying to be nice to y'all. So I think we have time for three questions. Okay, 1, 2. Oh, 2? Good. Okay, great. They'll be here after. They're not running away, right? There are no flights to catch. Okay, is there a mic that can... Do I just run down? Okay.
So mine is a very straight and simple question, but it goes to Michelle. I don't know whether it's from your collection, Gray Latitude, your chapbook, Gray Latitude, or the collection Arunga was talking about, but there's a phrase in a line in one of your poems, the injustice of fate. And I want to strongly assume that it's from the collection she was talking about, and you saying that it's part of you reconciling what is happening in Kenya. you using that phrase, the injustice of fate, is it kind of like a summary of all the injuries Kenya is putting on us at this moment, or what really is about the injustice of fate?
Yeah, thanks for that question and for acknowledging that line. You're right. I think, firstly, I think, whenever I'm writing poetry, I write for the people I love, and I think they are my biggest inspiration when it comes to thinking about what I'm putting down. Going back to your question, I think that's one of the most, powerful ways for poetry to make a difference, because we're thinking about those people that we are in relation to. The reason we want anything to change is because we care about the people we're in community with, the people we love. And I think love is not just, for the people you know, but for the people who are present around you, who, without whom there would be no reason to do anything else. You might not know them, but they matter in their own ways. So yes, the injustice of fate, I think, came to me in a moment where, you're thinking about how impossible or defeated you can feel sometimes when you assume that, the conditions that you are in are going to be there, throughout. And it is an injustice in many cases, because I think even the word fate, has a certain finality to it. But on the other side of that, and I think maybe this is also something that can be interpreted in different ways. But whenever I think a reader comes into contact with a line like that, my thought of how they should think about it is to almost flip it the other way around and think, okay, if fate is unjust, then what can we do to think about maybe a fate that is just, and what would that word be? What would it look like? So in one way, I think it calls to the present moment, where we are, the challenges we're facing as a community, as individuals, but also when you think about it, what can the opposite of this look like? How can we take back some level of control? How can we take back the kind of power that we know we have to be in charge of our own fates, but also to kind of dig into a collective fate where we can look out for an injustice that isn't mine alone, but is everyone's to encounter and to turn around. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, the three of you, for the great work you're doing. My name is Joki Wamai. Maybe my question is to Oeba. I love that you write in Spanish. Spanish. Sorry about that.
On God.
Actually, you know what? You know what, and you guys need to do the work. Ruto has gone to Spain today. No, I'm serious. So you need to get, the work you need to do, right? At least to the Spanish Pedro and the government and the audiences, to let them know. I'm not sure that's the right person to have. But to you, I love that you're using Sheng. And I like I'm seeing you going all over Europe, and I'm so excited because you're decolonizing the language of the oppressor. And through that language, you're speaking in all these spaces. So I'm just curious, how has the audiences been? I saw you, I think, in Amsterdam or wherever, somewhere you are in Europe. How has that been? And how can we use that, or as activists, poets, to continue? How have you used that probably to continue with the struggle? And also now that this panel is talking about poetry of resistance to injustice, remember to keep tweeting the hashtag Free Diangui. Diangui has been, it's now almost 2 weeks. let's not forget Diangui. And 2 days ago, I mean, is it 1 day ago, they arrested our comrades, Garang, so free Garang, free Generali. If you know, if you've been to the protest, he has such beautiful songs. And of course, free Chebu. So, and they are actually right now in Muthaiga police station. The police have put trumped up charges on them that they are the ones who organized goons. Can you imagine how diabolical? So thank you so much. And for me, I mean, you can answer the question, and let's continue doing this work of resistance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Viva, comrades, viva. Yes. I feel art is the language of the heart. And people resonate with art, with music, with poetry, and your energy speaks when you get into the room. So people might not understand what you say, but they get what you mean. And that goes with poetry. Poetry is much more, and spoken word is much more of an art of, not more of what you say, but what you really mean. And people really appreciate and understand. And I think also in Europe and the Western countries, they also appreciate art. They have their own struggles too. So no one is coming to save us. We will save ourselves. And just consistency, because consistency is the only thing failure cannot keep up with. We need to keep doing it. Because out there they have structures. We have national poet laureates. We have minimal pay for artists. We have structures. But here we don't have structures. So we just have to be poets. We have to be prophets of a future, not our own. We have to set the trail. And we have to keep on doing that. We have to use poetry to revolutionize the mindset. Because also here, the young people now understand we will only have a new generation of leaders when we have a new generation of voters. Even if we go to the streets and the mindset is not revolutionized, then we are doing nothing, because we will remove Kasongo and have another one. But when we have the revolution of the mindset, and we can only do that through art, through poetry, through books, we redefining the culture. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. How are all of you averting spectacle, especially with the ethics of representing our collective trauma?
I didn't catch the last part.
Averting spectacle, especially with being the people who are talking about the traumas. Yeah.
Okay. What a question to end on. I think the danger of spectacularizing, let's say, yourself and what you're writing about is ever present. But I think for me, it's I don't necessarily like to stay in that, to be trapped into that zone of feeling as if, there's something exceptional about my experience anyway, because I think there's that connection between the exceptional and the spectacular, right? The spectacularized. But when I think about some of the things I'm writing about, I'm even, like the wild card you threw me from, pulled from an interview, that is actually an experience that many people relate to. It just depends where you're oriented. And I think when I write about everything from, in sort of generational inheritances, these stories of, let's say, war, displacement, these generational ruptures, if anything, it connects me to more people. It connects me across histories, across languages, across these different cosmologies. I don't think it's limiting, and it's not within an African context, and certainly not within an international context. For example, I sort of grew up reading different poets of different sort of like traditions, et cetera, and I did not, it wasn't alien to me, it wasn't foreign to me, because I could think across difference. I would like to think that that's a muscle people have. Just because it's not particularly strong in Western context doesn't mean it doesn't exist globally. So I think for me, it's not my reality to sort of, to kind of be again confined in that space of what do people think about my writing? Does it, is it going to be fetishized? I really don't give a shit, to be honest with you. Like I'm writing for the people who get it, and the people who don't get it, Godspeed. It's really not. It's not. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's because that's how I approach text as a reader. To be honest, as well, I don't demand legibility from the text that I'm reading. I think that's such a juvenile way to approach literature. It's a juvenile way to approach the world. Full stop. So, I mean, listening to so many Kenyan sort of perspectives across the past couple of days, I mean, I don't have to understand you to relate. Glissant said that, quite well, So yeah, I think for me, it's not spectacular, it's not exceptional. So much of these struggles are the core of what it means to be human today. And they are they are the stories of the 21st century. Even when I think of the refugee narratives, the refugee is the central figure of the 21st century and will continue to be so. So to me, it's not fringe, and I don't need a badge or a sticker to assert that I know it in my being.
Allow me to reiterate quickly. So I write from a point of resonance. There's nothing spectacular about my spoken word, because everything I write, so my work is just to inspire hope.
And I think finally how I think I deal with that is to reconceptualize time for myself. I think, we all know about the 24-hour news cycle. We all know about how you have to be the first one to post something on Instagram or Twitter. I think I try to work against that. And I think when you take your time with the work and it comes to its fullness in its own time, then there's a certain richness that goes against the immediacy that spectacle kind of demands a lot of the time. So for me, it's just, I have the time, we all have the time. Time is all we have. There's no rush. The timelines that we've been forced to think with are sometimes against what truly works. And thinking against that helps also. As Momtaza said, you can turn into a propagandist at the end of the day. We don't want that. And also, I think there's also redefining what it means to talk or speak about something. The work really would do, going into the streets and buses to just talk about it. I think also thinking about your own timelines in that sense helps against aligning yourself with those that are detrimental and destructive.
All right, guys, much as I don't want to leave the stage and I could sit here listening to the gems all day, that was Michelle Angwenyi, Willie Oeba, Momtaza Mehri. And I have been your moderator, Abigail Arunga. Thank you so much.
Hey!